Hi, today we're going to take a look at this. Seek Thermally nicely sent me this new product to take a look at. This is the new Compact Pro thermal imager for Android and Apple phones. This is the Android version. This has a much higher resolution. It's got a 320 by 240 sensor, and they claim at least 15 frames per second frame rate. Physically it's pretty similar if you look at the original one, and the main difference is that we've got this focusable lens. This is also available on the older version as the XR variant, which has got the also got focusable lens. And the only other obvious difference is that the actual active part of the lens is maybe about twice the size. Obviously with a higher resolution you need a wider aperture to deal with that. One thing that is a bit of a pity, it would be nice if they'd have actually printed a little line on it to tell you which way this worked, which was near, which was far, because sometimes it can be a bit confusing to use, but it's not a big deal. But if you're doing the printing on the thing anyway, it might be nice to just put a little marker to give you some indication of that. They've also done a fairly significant update on the app to run these, which covers all the ranges. So you use the new app with either device, and it will automatically identify which one's which. This will generally, so when you plug in and install it, it will recognise it, but there are a few sort of timing glitches I've noticed. For example, it looks like it's trying to access it before Android has sort of discovered it. So what quite happened is you plug that in, it says, "Oops, we can't find a device," because Android is asking you. For some reason it seems to always do this. I'd have expected it to only do this the first time, but every time you plug in it gives this. I don't know, maybe that's an Android thing, but it does actually find it and then start up reasonably quickly. Now the first thing you notice when you do start it up is the image is a bit noisy. There is a sort of grain over the whole image, which is sort of visible in most of the different palette modes to greater or lesser extent. Obviously the higher sensitivity modes it looks worse, but in pretty much all modes you do get this very, very slight grainy effect. It's much less bad than on the original one, but it is quite noticeable. I'll just quickly run through the app. Basically you've got this home screen, which is mostly just links to stuff on their website, which is not particularly useful. So on the main screen you've got these various operating modes. I really don't like that. I think the user interface on this app is pretty terrible. I think it really needs some work. They claim to have revamped it to be all sort of new shiny, but I think basically it sucks quite significantly. You've got settings. Only one of these things is settings. The rest is all this stuff again. It's just links to videos. The user manual gives you about 3-page documents. So almost all of this screen is pretty much wasted. When you want to change a setting, you'll go through there, then go through the preferences. And then you've got the basic stuff: temperature, aspect ratio, and then to the video setting you need to go through yet another one. And there's various options here, like to show the temperature bar. There's also image smoothing. Now I can't find any documentation at all as to what this actually does. It's a bit hard to see from the screen. It seems to default to on, but I've not read. I mean, all the documentation is basically videos, and I've looked through a few of them, but not quite all of them. But I haven't yet found anything that explains what these actually do. And yet, so you've got the emissivity setting for. We've got some presets for the various emissivity values. And that's pretty much it for settings, and so the rest of this is just waste of screen space. It would be much better to have had the button go straight into your preferences and then have all this stuff available on like a help submenu or something. It's just really annoying. So we've got the various modes. We've got there's a split screen mode where we can see the combined vision and thermal image, and you can actually align this. If you double tap on here, again, that's something I only found out from the video. It would be nice if they just put a little bit of text saying, double tap to adjust this sort of thing. It's a bit less not obvious, but you can scroll that around and you can rescale it so you can get it to match up reasonably well with a thermal image for a certain distance. Obviously, as you change distances, that'll change to some extent, and as you get close up, it's going to be less useful. But and I've had it do this quite a few times. It just drops the connection for no obvious reason. I've had it, I thought it was just maybe this moving, but I've had it just sat on the bench, just sitting there doing nothing. It suddenly dropped the connection. So I don't know if that's a hardware issue or some problem with the app, but it seems to just sort of disconnect USB. But it seems to go back to the settings pretty much wherever you are. It seems to generally go back to where you were. So it's an annoyance, but not a major deal. So this is if we turn that off, it's a bit irritating. So this is the fixed spot temperature mode, just shows you the temperature at the center. There's a high-low mode that just shows you the hottest and coldest parts of the image. And this is the what they call just the default mode, which just sort of shows you an image. For some reason I'm getting a sort of temperature bar across here. I'm sure at one point it was up the side. I think it might be getting a bit confused with the screen orientation stuff, but I've also seen some issues with some text overwriting with this stuff over the top. Let's try turning that off. Oops. Region video, temperature bar off. Yes, that's got rid of that, but I'm sure I've seen it up the left-hand side at some point. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. I'm not totally sure what the difference is between these two modes. I think it might be something to do with sort of thermal resolution or something. That again, the manual just doesn't really give you. It says it's sort of full resolution mode, but I don't quite understand. You know, it does look different, but I'm not really quite sure exactly what the difference is there. And the manual's no real help at explaining that. This mode you can set high and low limits. So basically, you can basically fix it instead of it adjusting its range dynamically. You can actually have it at fixed temperature. Now, there's one thing that is really terrible about the way they've implemented this. The limits that you can set it to are only the limits it can see at once. So if you wanted to set it to a higher limit than it can actually see, you actually have to have something in the field of view that's at that temperature. So for example, if I put the soldering iron in the field of view, that's now showing the top, but you then have to hit refresh. That now sets the limit and now allows you to adjust it within those limits, and it's crapped out again. But that is just horrible and utterly terrible. There's no reason why they couldn't just let you set the limits fixed without reference to the current temperature range. That's just stupid. I hate that. There's also higher modes which will colour a scene above or below a certain temperature. And again, the user interface on this is horrible. To set the temperature, you slide this sideways over a very narrow range. And of course, as you increase up, quite often it's very easy to hit the tick, so it disappears. I mean, why is a temperature? Surely it should be up and down, not side to side. It's just totally stupid. And sort of set quite a range. You've got to sit there sort of chugging away. This is just really, really awful, utterly awful. And there's like lower than, and there's sort of within limits and so on. Yeah, again, that's all the usual sort of stuff. But you know, pretty terrible from a user interface point of view. But you know, that's all fixable. I'm sure hopefully they'll see the light and figure out that it's awful and actually fix it. The other thing is that when you're in some of the other modes like limit modes, although it will bring up the palette menu, it doesn't actually let you change anything. It doesn't. If it's going to say okay, we're in a limit mode, so we're not going to let you change the palette, it shouldn't let you bring the menu up. So you can end up in a situation where the buttons aren't doing things for some sort of really non-obvious reason. So again, if we're in, okay, it's fair enough to say, okay, this mode colours it above or below a certain temperature, which is fine. But if it's doing that, it shouldn't let you try and fail to select a palette. It's just stupid. Okay, we'll ignore how terrible this user interface is for the moment and actually look at the real performance. And so you can see there is a mixture of dynamic and fixed pattern noise. There is some definitely visible sort of fixed patterns in the noise. It's a bit hard to see. It's probably a bit hard to see on camera. But they are fairly visible, and even when there's a fairly reasonable temperature contrast in the field of view, so obviously that's a sort of massive difference. There's a sort of soldering line in the middle of the field of view. You do still see quite a significant amount of noise in the image, but this is a cheap image. This is by far the cheapest 320 by 240 thermal imager. It's $499. And it's crapped out again. And this crapping out, it could be my phone that's doing something weird. This is a Galaxy J5 2016, which is not it's a modern phone, but it's not super powerful. Now the other thing's noticeable. They're claiming depending on where you look, I've seen some sort of differing figures, but their spec sheet says greater than 15 hertz. And somewhere else I've seen it say up to 15 hertz depending on the phone, but this is clearly nowhere near that. I've not actually done any measurements, but I would say it's probably about 5. But what's more annoying is not so much the slow update rate, is the fact it's very inconsistent. The update rate varies sort of, it's very, very jittery. So that in particular when, for example, you're trying to focus, so for example, we try and get a close focus on this board here. The focusing is quite a slow process because you have to do it really slowly just to see the difference it's making. They claim the focus range is down to about 6 inches, which is about right. The level of detail at that close isn't sort of particularly great. I've done a few very quick experiments using an external zinc solenoid lens, and that does actually work sort of reasonably well. You can get some. These are that's a SOT 23 device there. it's not super crisp and clear, but I've not done too much experimenting. You can probably find a reasonable permutation of the lens focus and the distance for an external lens. So for viewing small stuff, it's good enough for fault finding use. It's not as good as say a Tweak T4 with a close-up lens or the lens adjusted, but it's usable. Again, like the other one, you hear the shutter clicking quite frequently. I think that does reduce in frequency a little bit over time. The fixed noise doesn't seem to change that much. I think maybe some of the fixed noise actually is slightly lower over time as it settles down, but there is still pretty much a very constant amount of noise on screen. But I mean, it doesn't really detract from the usability. It's almost more an aesthetic thing than anything else. It's not so bad as to make it look really terrible. Now, obviously, the main competition for this device is the Flir One, although the Flir One is substantially cheaper. Certainly compared to the older Seek, the Flir One is very, very much better. There's very little argument that the image quality, particularly with the MSX enhancement, these two being similar price, the Flir One in terms of performance is quite substantially better in most respects. Obviously it is bigger, it's got the internal battery, which is annoying. The power draw, I've measured incidentally this one while I think about it, the power draw this isn't too bad. It's about 55 milliamps at 5 volts, so it's not going to sort of use ridiculous amounts of battery power. But one of the things the Flir One has actually got, they actually give you a couple of different rubber mountings because it's wide. It actually sits on the phone quite nicely without any wobbling. So sort of that, if once you get that right, it's not too bad. Whereas this, of course, this is just sitting there, so it's sort of quite fragile and wobbly. You could probably put a piece of foam or something in there to stabilise it, because it's only hanging over one side. There's a limit to how much that will stabilise sort of motion in that direction. So sort of mechanically, it's not brilliant. It comes with the same case that the original one goes on, which is it's quite a rugged case. It sort of feels quite nice. Maybe a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but it's perfectly okay. And of course the wobble is a bit of an issue because you've got this focusing, as you turn it to focus it, the thing is actually moving around, which is not great. I definitely think you probably, if you use this a lot, you probably want to put some sort of rubber bumper or something just to stabilise this, because as you're focusing it just doesn't really feel particularly stable. And the other problem this actually shares with the Flir One is that for phones which have got the USB socket on the top, there's no way to tell it to reorientate the screen. So with a phone with a top USB socket, the image is always upside down whichever way you turn it, which makes it very difficult to use. And it's one of those things, okay, there aren't that many phones like this, but it must be such a trivial thing to add in the app as a setting. It's just stupid they don't do it, but say Flir don't appear to have done that either. I don't really understand why. Now, because this in theory supports frame rates over 9 frames per second, it is subject to US export controls. It's got some various labels on it, and you do have to do a sort of register when you first get it and install the app. You do have to register on their site, give it an email address, and I believe it uses location data. Now, I don't know whether it looks just at the location when you register, or maybe there's it's perhaps got some active stuff in there to make it not work in areas where it's not supposed to for the export regulations. I have tried powering the phone up with all the location services turned off, and it does still seem to work. So it's not like it's like continuously checking the location and refusing to work if it can't figure out where it is. I've not tried any sort of spoofing or anything to sort of make it look like it's somewhere weird, just in case I might end up it might report back and I end up on some weird watch list somewhere. But it might be interesting to try some of the various location spoofing apps, or a physical GPS simulator, to figure out exactly what they're doing there to comply with the export control side of things. But I don't know to what extent the frame rate is particular to my phone, or the fact that it's only running at maybe 5 frames a second on sort of a fairly modern phone. Unless it's something very specific, like for example a USB bandwidth issue that's much better in other chipsets, I think they might as well have perhaps just limited it to 9 FPS just to get to not have to worry about the export side of things. But certainly the spec sheet on their website that says greater than 15 Hz without any qualification is pretty much misleading. I mean, I think that would be a disappointment if you bought it expecting that. But I've not had a chance to try it on that many other phones. But they don't, for example, list any specific phones on their website, as far as I can see, that it's been tested with to actually achieve that high frame rate. The frame rate is actually comparable to the Flir One. Again, it is quite phone dependent, and I suspect it's probably a combination of graphics performance, phone CPU performance, and USB bandwidth, because obviously phones aren't necessarily really optimized to do high bandwidth through the USB, because it's normally just used for file transfer and so on. So it may well be that certain phone chipsets just have some bottlenecks for the USB transfer rate, but it would be quite interesting to see you know, which phones it does achieve a high frame rate on and what sort of rates are achievable in practice. But so I just haven't had a chance yet to test that. Right, just doing an immediate sort of side-by-side comparison of the two models. The image quality on the new one is very noticeably better, both in terms of resolution and noise. So for example, we go out here, you know, we can see we've got much cleaner edges, much better definition, and it's just sort of overall quite a lot nicer, which of course you'd expect, but it is possibly more difference than just the difference in resolution would lead you to believe. This is a fairly old one of the original ones. I don't know if they've made any improvements. Certainly the very first ones were somewhat disappointing, and then they did some software changes that improved them. But you can see the fields of view are fairly similar between the two. If we do a side-by-side comparison with the Flir One, you can see the angle of the Flir One's on the left. The field of view is slightly narrow, but not hugely. The Flir One is noticeably less noisy, and obviously the resolution is slightly lower, but really not, you know, not vastly. Incidentally, I've put a label over the visible camera on the Flir One just to avoid the MSX having any influence. You need to put like a translucent label, so if you just cover it completely, then you get a lot of noise that comes over the image. Unfortunately, you can't turn off the MSX on the Flir One. But I'd say, you know, overall image quality is actually not that different. You know, it is very slightly blurry, but I'd say both of them are equally usable, really. That certainly at sort of longer distances where I'm comparing, it's a bit harder. It's a bit harder to compare it indoors. Let's give this a try. So again, we can see we've got a slightly narrower field of view on the Seek, but you know, it's a swings and roundabouts. Say that the Seek is a little bit noisier, the resolution is slightly better, but I would say it's not vastly different, and I'm really not sure the difference justifies the extra price. It's basically about twice the cost of the Flir One. And of course, once we enable the MSX on the Flir One, then obviously we get that extra outlining for detail. So certainly for a lot of applications where you're trying to sort of figure out what it is that's hot in a scene, then that's a big advantage. Now for close-up work, obviously the adjustable lens does give you an advantage in that it'll get a better focus on close-up images. So again, we're comparing with the Flir One, and you can see that you can see roughly where it is on the Flir One, whereas you can see more detail, quite a lot more detail on here. And say with an additional lens, you could probably get, but you can see you can sort of just about make out individual components. Again, just using the standard lens. So if you're doing a lot of close-up stuff, then that lens adjustability would be a quite significant advantage. Although of course you can use external lenses, which aren't sort of particularly expensive. If if you're always doing nothing but this, then it'd be worth sort of getting another lens and making up a lens holder for it. But the image quality on that is still nowhere near like a proper sort of 320-240 like the modified E4. For this, because I don't use it that often, instead of using lens, I'll just turn the lens around. Basically, that little white dot just shows the lens position. I just rotate the lens to get a close-up focus. So if you compare that on here, on the same scene, you can get really close in and get a lot of quite a lot of detail. But obviously, this is about twice the cost of the Seek as well, so it's not really comparing the same. But although nominally the two are the same resolution, the image quality and sort of definition from the E4 is quite substantially better. But obviously that's got a much larger sensor as well. And right, just to sort of quickly summarise this, the sort of pros and cons with all, with all the various on paper, the resolution of this is comparable to some of the higher end devices like the OpGel Thermat, but I think the optical performance and sensor size means it's you're never going to get close to that image performance on a relatively low cost device. And I think there's pretty much pros and cons on all. If you want the cheapest, the most money, you want some thermal imaging at the lowest cost, and I think the Flir One is probably still the winner in that respect. If you want the extra resolution and the focusable lens, this is pretty good. I'm not really sure if it's worth the additional money. It depends very much what you want to do. Perhaps the compact with the XR, that's basically the older version with the adjustable lens, might do you if you're just basically looking for the minimum cost. But I think this is, in terms of sort of you get what you pay for, I think this actually does sit well. It's not it's not glaringly bad. It's not glaringly brilliant. It's sort of mid-price, mid-performance. The app definitely needs work. The app has got some, the user interface is just pretty awful. There's no really excuse for that. And that definitely needs some work, as well as minor things like dealing with phones with sockets on the top. Incidentally, I did mess around with just extending it. One thing I did notice about this is that it's very sensitive to power. Just to get it to work over this lead, I actually had to put a 47 microfarad cap at this end of the cable, because what would happen is it would power up and working. As soon as the shutter clicked in, it would crash. So it's clearly quite sensitive to the source impedance of the power, and it was actually quite difficult to measure the power draw, because it kept just falling over because of the extra resistance in the supply lead when I was measuring the current. So you probably can run it. You need to take a bit of care with probably some local decoupling. As far as I know, there's no plans from Seek to make a Windows version of this. Somebody, I believe, has written a Windows app to control this one by reverse engineering all the USB protocols, and I think they've got some sort of quite decent facilities on that. It'd be interesting to see if they do the same thing on this, because I mean, this with a USB connection onto Windows might be quite an interesting device. And again, that might get around some of the frame rate issues. It'll also be interesting to see how all this registration export control stuff works, whether that's actually, I mean, if it's been done properly, it's probably ought to have been some authorization thing that goes into here, into the firmware, but it may well be that's all handled by the app, so that might someone might get into a slightly sticky situation if you can just run this with that other software off Windows and get high frame rates, but we'll see. Okay, that's all the review stuff. I think it's time to take a look inside. Right, like the other one, it looks like it's sort of just glued together. Let's see if we can crack it open again. It's a metal case. Right, so the internal construction looks a little bit different. You can actually see sort of quite nicely in there. We don't have, this is the older one, where we had this sort of plastic lens assembly with the lens mounted in it, which was a bit of a pain to sort of take it apart and preserve the alignment. But obviously there's some sort of similarities. Sort of the flex board is the same. It's a similar size PCB. So this is the old one here, but we've got this silicone rubber coating. I'm guessing that feels, not sure if that's thermally conductive, but that may be partly sort of shock mounting, and maybe thermal conduction to transfer any heat. But it only takes 250 milliwatts, so it's not like it's getting sort of crazy hot or anything. And we've got sort of similar actually pretty similar board layout here. There's an unpopulated component here, which is probably for the iPhone version for Apple's evil DRM chip, I would imagine. And then obviously they probably use the same PCB and just a different connector assembly. So here we can see the shutter mechanism. Let's compare it with the old one. So again, the old one's on the right here. So the coil and the shutter mechanism looks fairly similar. So the difference being that here the lens is mounted in the case rather than being mounted on this plastic thing. And we've got this little plastic shutter for the calibration. So This one's sort of still okay, so I don't really want to take the lens cover off this one. But again, like the other one, it's using the NXP LPC 4300. Yeah, the new one uses the 4330, which has just got a little bit more RAM in there, but otherwise you can see it's all the construction is pretty similar. So pretty much the only major difference is the sensor itself. And also the way that the flex goes onto the board. On the old one, the flex was actually soldered down. So this one, it just goes down onto an FFC connector. So in principle, you know, if you broke this connector, it would be in theory replaceable. Although whether you could actually get the part or not is another matter. But at least it's potentially more repairable than the older one, which is a bit tricky because you'd have to unsolder this flex. Again, if you could actually get it. This chip on the back is just the serial flash for the program for the micro. So yeah, internally it's pretty much the same, just with a different sensor. I don't think I'm going to pull this sensor apart, seeing as this does still work, and it's quite a reasonable device. I don't think we'd actually gain. It's probably just pretty much the same layout as the old one, just bigger. So it's hard to see here, but this chip is actually bigger, physically bigger. So the pixel pitch is probably the same or similar, just obviously a larger die. So one additional detail here: in the casting of the front, they actually incorporated this standoff. So that's what maintains the positioning of the sensor relative to the lens, and that's probably also partly what this silicone is about, in terms of just holding everything in place once the case is glued together, because there's no screws or anything holding this down. This is just sort of held in position. There's probably some not sure if it actually rests on those pillars there, but it's all sort of just like a push fit together and held together by the case being glued. There's no screws or anything, so they're trying to minimise the assembly cost on this. But yeah, surprisingly similar to the previous version, just with a bigger sensor and a different lens. In fact, this does actually feel sort of quite clammy, so I think this is actually thermally conductive. And of course, one thing about transferring the heat to the case, it's not so much sort of just transferring heat because it gets too hot for general operation, of course, because it's a thermal sensor. Yeah, if this thing is getting warm, then that's actually going to cause problems with the actual sensor itself, because obviously it's quite sensitive to small temperature changes. So obviously this is designed to be conducting the heat away from the sensor and into the case. Also, there's not a lot of heat. It just means that it can maintain a more stable temperature on the PCB, or especially around the sensor area. One thing I also noticed that on the other thing I noticed is this, well, this one does appear to have a temperature sensor behind it. Doesn't appear to be anything on here, but of course they might have integrated that onto the die, because it's a new device and a high performance thing. They may well have put some facility to actually measure the temperature directly on the die. Seek have brought out one or two sort of standalone handheld cameras, so it'd be interesting to see if they build this into a handheld device, sort of a completely standalone device. That might be quite interesting to see how it compares with some of the traditional standalone thermal cameras as well. So wait and see. So I think after the initial slight disappointment, I think Seek are actually starting to produce some quite reasonable products. And so this is probably the cheapest 320 by 240 sensor by quite a way that you can buy. So if you do really want that resolution, then it's pretty much a no-brainer. This is probably the best value for the moment. And so the focusable lens is really nice if you're doing a wide range of close-up and longer distance work. But say for sort of fun toy type value, then the Flir One is probably better value. But if you're actually using it seriously, then and you can make use of the resolution, then this might be worth giving some serious consideration. But I think they definitely need to improve that app, because it's pretty horrible. But also maybe look at perhaps some way of making this mounting more stable. But obviously that's something you can probably do yourself with just some foam tape or something.